Good morning, Heart of Life. Welcome all those here at Garden City, and welcome those watching online. If you weren't awake before that song, you should, I hope, be awake now. Great job. That was awesome. Just want to welcome you and introduce you to Sherry. Sherry was just down in Mexico, and she has a story to tell about all that she experienced down there.
Thank you. Thanks, and good morning. I can look out and see a lot of the team that are sitting here this morning and behind me, so that's awesome. As Gabe said, my name is Sherry Evans, and I just want to share a little bit about the recent mission trip to Acuña, Mexico. On the screen, you'll see photos of various ministries that we did. There were 13 of us from Heart of Life that left on July 24th. It was the fourth of our large group mission trips to Acuña. And I want to say that I'm very humbled that I have gotten to go on all four of those trips. And not only is it a privilege and a blessing, but it's a great responsibility, not only to represent Heart of Life, but also, more importantly, to reflect and represent the will of our God. And I feel like this team did that. Many of you, I want to thank you because many of you prayed and you purchased items needed on our trip and you donated funds, and we are all extremely grateful for that and your generosity. We talked about it several times while we were there, that was awesome what you all did, and your prayers and gifts helped make this whole trip possible. Now, as it goes with God, He puts together a perfectly chosen team every year. And so every year I say, wow, that was a phenomenal team, because every year it is, even though it might be made up of different people. But that's because God knows what He's doing, doesn't He? So I have two observations to share real quick. They're twofold. First, this trip was by far filled with more unexpected twists and turns and events and requests made to us once we got down there. For example, we were originally going to hold one VBS on Saturday morning and do a quick little preview on Friday night to get the people coming and interested. And but while we were there Friday night saying good night, buenos noches, and we'll see you tomorrow, we got asked to stay and do a full VBS. So we were all kind of smiling, looking at each other, and it didn't take long, and we turned it into a full VBS. And then additionally, the pastor and his wife said, well, how about you do a third session of VBS on Sunday morning before the service? And then how about you all lead the service on Sunday morning? Well, by this time, we're kind of like, oh, okay. This meant coming up with extra songs, crafts, the recreational activities, and Bible stories. Now, this team that I said God put together jumped in at every turn to accommodate the requests that the church had made for us. And God showed up big time to give us focus and energy when we were really exhausted. Because on Saturday night, when we found out we were going to lead the service on Sunday morning, we were all really tired from a long day, but that's okay because we did what God wanted us to do, and He put us there for a reason. And it was exciting that He could bring us to that focus and put the ideas in our head, the things we needed, new songs, new crafts, new recreation, everything, and new stories. So God did all that through that team He built. Now, the second thing I want to talk about real quick is the children that came with us. There were 4 children from ages 2 through 17, just amazing. You guys should be so proud. They went there and were such hard workers. I'm talking about Indy too. At age 2, she jumped right in and helped, and she was awesome. But these kids, they were so quick to think, they were quick to plan, and they were so bold when they shared the gospel with the children at the VBS at the church in Acuña. But also when we went to the refugee shelter, these kids stood right up and shared the gospel, and it was enough to make me get goosebumps. So it was awesome. We should all be so proud and excited for this new bold generation that is coming up, and they're already sharing Jesus with people. So thank you to all of those kiddos that went too, and they were just awesome. I hope that in hearing some of the things that you heard last week and this week about our trip and what you'll hear to come, I hope you will consider praying and being a part of our team and ask God if he wants you to come to the next trip to Acuna. I will be so excited to hear what your impressions will be after that. And if you have questions or comments, as always, you know you can ask Matt Cox, Kevin Jennings, you can ask Scott Hall. There are a lot of people you can talk to about, but we hope that you'll consider coming and see if that's God's will for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. I think there's a common theme that's happened with a lot of our mission trips this year. Like Sherry said, they started out with one set of objectives or goals or thoughts on what things were going to be, and God had different plans, and they were flexible, and they did those things. And I think that is, like I said, it's a theme that I have seen throughout all the testimonies that we've had on our mission trips, and I think it's one that should be kind of idea bulbs popping off in our head. Maybe God is trying to show us all something, that it's not about us, it's not about our plans, it's not about what we want. It's having that heart and that mind that is open to really listening to God and asking him and being willing to take those steps towards what he wants in your life. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the worship team and have a great rest of the Sunday morning.
That was special for me. Like, I will admit to you that I have read, for example, the Psalms my whole life where people struggle in being honest with God. I have often said those things to God, but never in my entire life have I ever had the chance to sing them to him, which is what the Psalms were. And I just thank him for a chance to be honest and knowing that he loves us and cares. Good morning. My name is Jeff, and I am grateful for the opportunity to share God's word with you today. Before I do that, though, I want to challenge you to get something on your calendar, all right? September the 14th, so a little over a month from now, it's a Sunday. We're going to do something different that weekend, one big church gathering all together in one place, all right? So on that weekend, no services in Harrisonville, no service here at Garden City, no service at East Lynn, but we all will converge at Still Meadow, which formerly the farm, all right? So just up the highway from here. If you've been to this event before, same place, all right? And it is going to be a morning, an afternoon. We're going to open the gates about 9, a time that we can play together, we worship together. We're going to celebrate baptisms together, and then a good old fish fry for lunch. Come on, you can't beat that, all right? So mark your calendar. It is a beautiful chance for us to be together. It's a beautiful chance for you to invite some folks that maybe church is not something familiar to them. It's a cool entrance point. I would encourage you to do that. I want to talk to you real quick, though. For some of you, it's time to be baptized, all right? And some of you know it, like you have turned to Jesus in faith. You are following him, and you know your next step is baptism. I want to encourage you to get signed up. Maybe you have questions. Maybe others, like, I'm not sure what this means. We would be so honored to have a conversation, and let's talk about where you're at in that and what that can mean for you. If you go to the website, heartoflife.org, you'll find a tab, What's Happening, and under What's Happening, you'll see a place where it talks about worship and baptism. If you click on that, you'll get to this event. It'll talk about the event, and at the bottom, there's a place where you can sign up. If you do that, we will be in contact. We will talk from there. We would love to have that conversation and help you to take that next step that God calls us to take. All right? So mark your calendars. September 14. It's going to be a good day. Welcome to week 2 of a little series that we're calling Strong and Safe. Strong and safe. Now, if you're new to Heart of Life today, the way it works around here is every week we look at what Scripture, the Bible, has to say, and then we talk about how do we live this. And so I'm encouraging you every week, follow along with me in your Bible. right? Whether that's physical or digital, however you have it, yeah, it'll be on the screen, but learn how to find where those books are, how those are connected. And then second, I encourage you to write down a few things. You don't have to turn this into a classroom, but things that are valuable to us, we want to remember, and you're much more likely to remember beyond today if you'll just write a few of those things down. This series is very closely tied to the last series that we were in for the entire summer about the fruit of the Spirit. We're looking at one aspect of the fruit, gentleness, and we've just turned it into a little series by itself. And so before we get to Galatians 6, which is where we're going in a minute, I want to take a few minutes to make sure we realize the connection. Over the summer, in this series, we became familiar with a phrase that goes like this: whose you are transforms who you are and changes what you do. We discovered all of this is tied to identity, whose you are. And so the Bible tells us clearly we were made for relationship with our Creator. But when that relationship is broken, and therefore when our identity search is placed upon our shoulders to figure out who we are, it's crushing. Not only for our own soul, but also for all the other relationships that we are connected to. In other words, if you don't belong to Jesus, then you are searching for your identity in something other than Him. Some of the top contenders are things like your work, your career, maybe a valuable relationship, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a spouse, your kids. And I'm telling you, none of those can hold up under that weight. You are placing an unfair amount of expectation on them, and eventually it leads to those relationships being fractured. Let me give you an example. If I choose for my identity to be my work, I'm going to say it's my career that defines who I am. This is where I seek my fulfillment, being successful. You realize then everything else and everyone else must serve that end. So here's how this ends up looking. Honey, I'm sorry I'm never home. And kids, I'm sorry I can't make it to your game or your program. But why can't you appreciate what I'm providing for you? That is really an identity issue that has put its hope in work and not in God. And not only does work not do its job to give me fulfillment, it never gets there, but it also leads to brokenness in even what we would declare to be our most valuable relationships. Likewise, let's say you seek identity in your spouse. No matter how amazing your spouse is, they will never be able to fill the emptiness that only God can fill. If you're going into marriage with that expectation, it will be devastating. A failure to understand who you are puts you not only at odds with you, but it eventually leads to being at odds with the other people, significant relationships in your life. The good news of Jesus changes all of that when we believe. Here's what I mean. My primary identity is not being a pastor. It's not. I love being a pastor. I love getting to do what I do. But that's not my primary identity. My primary identity is not being a husband. I love my wife like crazy. I will lay down my life for her. But being a husband is not my primary identity. I love my kids more than I even know how to express, but Being a dad is not my primary identity. Y'all, my primary identity is in a relationship with Jesus where I am fully loved, where I am fully forgiven. My identity is that now I am an adopted child of God. And that means now I'm free. What I mean is, I love my wife like crazy, I love my kids like crazy, I love being a pastor like crazy, but none of that controls my ultimate joy. It doesn't. Can any of those relationships give me a bad day? Sure. But they can't crush the meaning of my world. Because I get to now walk with the Spirit of God, I can walk with you in a way that does not enslave either one of us. Now hang on, because I'm going to show you some examples, because this is coming into play with where we're going in Galatians chapter 6, I promise. Let me give you an example. I am not a slave to what you think about my sermon today. I'm free. Now, I want you to like it. I appreciate what you think, but I'm not living and dying by it today. I have watched this process happen my entire life, and there are some times that people might say, man, that sermon's great, and we're going to invite our whole neighborhood to come and hear. And then likewise, there are those who are like, it's all right, but it's not that good, and honestly, we can go somewhere else and hear something that's more encouraging. I've actually seen the same person make both of those statements, all right? My point is, because of my identity in Jesus, I'm set free to share the truth with you in love, to do the best that I can, being obedient to the one who loves me and saves me, so I don't have to be loved by you. I want to be, but I don't have to be, which means I'm free to love you fully. But it's anchored in identity. Because of my identity in Jesus, I'm free to hear criticism and to choose to do something good with it, instead of always having to figure out how to manipulate what was said to me, turn it back on whoever said it in order to make me look better than I really am. I don't have to play that game, because my identity in Jesus has set me free to hear even criticism. My identity in Jesus has set me free to to not take things personally that are not personal. And can I tell you, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's not actually personal? It's not. I'm going to admit to you, I was so grateful this week to have been studying this text and this point today when I decided to pull through a certain drive-through at a fast food restaurant. As I placed my order and then I drove to the window, arriving at the window, a lady appears and she says to me, "You didn't do what I said. You missed my window." I said, "What?" She said, "You didn't do what I said. You missed my window." Now, you know when you sometimes go through the drive-thru, there's two windows, but when you get to the first window and there ain't nobody there, you go to the next window. I did it. And she was not happy with me, to say the least. I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. I'm holding out my money." And she says, "I can't take your cash at this window." And I'm still holding it, and she goes, "I can't take your cash at this window." And I said, "What do you want me to do?" I wish I had said it a little bit nicer, but that's actually how I said it. I'm like, what do you want me to do? She begrudgingly took my money and walked away. And in those moments, again, so grateful to actually have been working on this week, because I'm not sure where this would have gone otherwise. But in that process, I'm realizing either this lady is having a bad day, or she's terrible at customer service. But either way, this isn't personal. This isn't personal. I want her to be more respectful to me, but I don't need it. And I'm free from letting the lack of it affect my attitude and my action toward her, both in this moment and toward anybody else the rest of my day. That was even tested when she returned, and as I held out my hand to get my change, she literally threw my change. It left her hand and landed in mine as she said, "Have a nice day." And I smiled, and as I drove away, again, I was thanking God for what I was studying this week. Can you relate to that? Y'all, the more this world is about you, then the angrier and the more frustrated you are going to be, because this world is not going to deliver. The more the world is not about you, but instead about Jesus, then the happier and freer you will be. The good news of Jesus makes this identity possible, and the family of God shares this identity, which creates something astonishing. And today we get to see a portion of what that astonishing is. All right? Galatians chapter 6, it begins this way in verse 1, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, Now this is not caught like a sin detective parked down the street from your house. I'm watching you, caught ya. All right, that's not what this caught is. This word caught means entangled. It means ensnared, sort of like in a net, in regards to sin. Now, we know the Bible teaches us that we have an enemy who is very real, and that enemy seeks to steal and kill and destroy. That's his mission. I say that often. It's not to trip you up, it is to take you out. But the Bible also tells us that we can't just blame everything on him, because James, for example, tells us that each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. And so, in other words, both are at play. We got an enemy who is tempting, but our own evil desires, right, at times cause us to take the bait. This is a case where sin is beginning to overcome someone. This is not, oh, you sin, caught ya. This is caught in sin, entangled. That sin is overcoming. You are seeing a brother or sister caught in a net of sin and drowning, if you will. So what do? Next part of the verse. You who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. You who live by the Spirit, sometimes the translation is you who are spiritual. And we talked about this during the last series. That doesn't mean those who are the faith elite who never sin. In Galatians, even the Apostle Peter had to be corrected. Remember that? Spiritual means this is life from the Spirit and empowered by the Spirit. So he's saying those of you where that is the case, your life is from the Spirit, your life is empowered by the Spirit. The Spirit leads you to restore. Restore, it means to mend, like mending a net or mending a broken bone, right? It is to restore those caught in sin. This is what the family of God does. This is what life from the Spirit looks like. In 1 Peter 4, verse 8, we are reminded above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. In other words, the family of God is not without sin. Okay? That's not what's going to make us great. We sin, but we are anchored in love, which means This family of God is not a police state environment where we are always waiting for someone to mess up so that we can pounce. Caught ya. No. If you just have a tough day, nobody's pouncing. We don't pounce on that. Because come on, we all know what it looks like to have a tough day. And what I mean by a tough day is, at the end of the day, I look back and I go, I wish I had not sinned that way. I wish I had not done that. I wish I had not acted like that, right? Maybe it's someone who's saying words to you that are not the kindest words, right, that could be said. Maybe it's someone who's displaying a bit of impatience with you. Come on, we sin. People sin. People have days where we miss it. But we, as the family of God, are going to give the benefit of the doubt in those moments. We're not pouncing. But when that sin becomes something ongoing, a pattern where we suddenly realize, I'm starting to see my brother or sister, they are entrapped, they are entangled, they are caught in this sin, they are starting to drown, it's time to act. By the way, sin usually looks like a beautiful place to swim, right? In my lifetime, I have seen some beautiful places to swim, some beautiful lakes, some waterfalls that have beautiful pools beneath them, right? Sin always looks like a beautiful place to swim. But once you're in it, you suddenly begin to realize this is dirtier, this is murkier water than I ever perceived it to be. And the undertow suddenly makes you realize this is a dangerous place to be. I'm going to call it a deadly ditch. You thought it was a beautiful water hole. It's really a deadly ditch. And I'm using the word ditch because, like, there's nothing glorious about a ditch, right? When you see someone starting to drown in that ditch, you don't ignore it. And you don't turn it into godly gossip by making it a prayer request. But from love, you restore. How? How did it say? We are to restore them what? Gently. Okay, well, what does that mean? Like, how do you know how gentle to be? Because come on, with some people, you just can't be gentle enough. Right? Have you noticed that? No matter how gentle you are, right? They scream, right? They're like my bulldog. I have a bulldog that when we get her claws trimmed, right? You can be as gentle as possible. She screams like you're cutting her legs off. Some people are like that. No matter how gentle you are, right? They scream. And then there are others that don't seem to feel the sledgehammer upside their head, right? It's like, what? How do I be gentle? What does this mean? And you know where he takes us? Watch your own heart. Watch your own heart. Look where it goes. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. I'm going to give you a quirky way of saying this, and again, thank goodness I'm free, because you might not like how I'm about to say it, but for me, this is how I remember it, all right? I need to climb into my own heart as I climb into their ditch. Both those need to happen. Why am I going to climb into my own heart? Because I want to check if my motive is right. He's like, watch yourself. I want to know if my motive is right. Last week, Brenton was here sharing a testimony about Mexico, and Brenton had a shirt on. I don't know if you remember it last week. It had two words, but God, okay? And he told me afterwards, he said, Jeff, I thought of you when I saw this shirt because you are always saying we like big butts in the Bible. And he's right, we do. And what makes them big butts is when they're connected to God, but God. That is exactly the case in this situation, right? When I see someone entangled in sin, I see someone drowning in the ditch, I know, but for the grace of God, there go I. If you take a position of superiority, if you take a position of arrogance, it will be impossible to approach them gently. Even if it's secretly, your heart will be delighting in showing how much better you are because you are not in the ditch. But when you remember what it was like to be in the ditch, or at least acknowledge that you know how easy it would be for you to be in that ditch, now your motive is wanting the Holy Spirit to do a work in them just like you've experienced Him doing a work in you. Then gently, you can reach into the ditch and say, let's get out of here. Let's get out of here. Your motive is genuine. You care about our family, and you restore gently. Now, I want to pause for just a second. This text is not really about this, but I think it's worth just taking a few minutes to consider. What if you are on the receiving end, you're in the ditch, and you're on the receiving end of, let's say, attempted gentle restoration, all right? Well, a couple of things to guard against. The first one, don't look for errors in their life to belittle the problem in your life. What I mean is, when you're in the ditch and someone comes to you and says, hey, look, this is what I'm seeing, and they're doing it in a gentle way, but this is what I'm seeing. Isn't it so weird that many times in our mind, it's as if we can prove that the one who is reaching in is not perfect either, then somehow that makes us feel better about our imperfection that has gotten us in the ditch. You know what I'm saying? And so sometimes our response can be, oh, you don't have issues? Right? Somebody's saying, hey, here's something that I'm seeing in you, and we're going, you think you're perfect? Man, don't do that. If somebody plays that card on you when you reach into the ditch, I would encourage you to just go, yes, I have issues, and we can talk about all those you want to, but right now I'm saying, come on, man, let's get out of here. Let's get out of this ditch. Second, don't just consult others who are not willing to disagree with you. I know I could say that in a positive way, but I kind of like the negative because it's how we work. Don't just find people that you know will side with you. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, this is what I see, what we tend to want to do is go find people who will see it the way we see it. Instead, find people who love you and are not afraid to be honest with you. Here's how it goes. Let's say Frank comes to me and he says, Jeff, look, man, I just want to talk to you about this. There's just a harshness that I'm seeing from you toward your wife and your kids. Not gentle, a harshness. So you know what I tend to want to do? I want to go find somebody who will agree with me that I'm not harsh. Right? And so I go to somebody and I go, hey, Frank says that I'm being harsh with my wife and my kids. Do you see that? No, I don't see that. I didn't think so. Neither do I. You know what? Maybe Frank's just jealous of your family. I think that's exactly what's going on here. Have you seen his family? They're pretty miserable, right? That's the game that we can play. Limit the cowards around you. Invite the people who are strong around you. Consider the accusation before God and with the strong who love you enough to tell you. Even when someone approaches you with improper motivation, even when someone approaches you and maybe they're not gentle, whether it is the super godly person or it is a hypocrite and you know it, you owe it to your own soul to consider if the accusation is true. When we do this right, this kind of community is beautiful. It's not attacking. It's not accusatory. It is beautiful. Because people whose identity in Jesus are set free to fully love one another. People who are free to speak the truth in love. People who are free to receive criticism. People who don't take personal what is not personal. People who will climb into the ditch for one another and say, let's get out of here. But wouldn't you agree? We tend not to see this type of community very often. In fact, I think a lot of people just avoid it because they're afraid to do what's required. But when it is present, it is beautiful in the sense that we begin to bear, to carry one another's burdens. We don't have to carry them alone. That's exactly where the text goes next. Carry each other's burdens. You know how beautiful a family it is when they carry each other's burdens? When you don't have to carry them alone. Now, have you noticed that some burdens really can be dealt with quickly? Sometimes the only holdup in relieving the burden is we refuse to engage it. We refuse to say, hey, here's what. But a lot of times, a burden can be settled quickly, a conversation, a prayer of encouragement, a step of action, a follow-up, and boom, sometimes it's done. But then there are other burdens, let's just be honest, they don't end. They don't end. Those are the kind of conversations that go like this. Come on, man. We had this conversation last year, and the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that. But in this kind of community, where the motive is genuine and it moves from love, even when the burden doesn't end, you know what we do? We keep reaching. And we say, I'm going to keep saying to you, let's get out of this ditch. And I will say it, and I will say it, and I will say it until I walk you to glory. What a family. When we tend to think about burdens, I think most of the time we usually associate it with trauma, to be honest. We think about maybe somebody lost their job. And it's a burden that they need help, or maybe it's a sickness they're going through, or maybe a loss. And I'm going to say, without a single doubt in my mind and in my heart today, you guys do that so well. You do. You do. Visits, meals, money, you do. But the context of this passage is also reminding us that sometimes the burdens are related to sin. Like, maybe it looks like a financial situation, but it's because of sin that they're in this financial situation, you know what I'm saying? Or maybe it's a relationship issue, but it's because of sin. In other words, sometimes burdens, we look at the situation and we go, man, I can't believe that happened to them. Like, that is so unfair. They are such good people. Like, they are so faithful to God. I cannot believe that this has happened to them. I cannot believe that they are going through this, right? And then there are other situations where you're like, even if you don't say it out loud, you're like, well, what did they think was going to happen? Like, where did they think this was going to end? And what the scripture today is reminding us of is that either of those is supposed to look like a love that continues to reach into the ditch and says, let's get out of here. Let's get out of here. when you do that, what he says here is, in this way, you fulfill the law of Christ. Now, that's an interesting way to say it in a book that we're almost to the end of, and it's been all about that if you are led by the Spirit, then you are not under the law, right? And it's referring to Mosaic law, and we know that God's law through Moses, I mean, it is good, but it couldn't change our heart. But through Jesus' love for us, laying down his life for us, now through faith in him, his Spirit pours his love into our hearts. And through such love, we fulfill the law of Christ to love one another as he has loved us. In the church, the law of Christ cancels the cancel culture. We'll say that again. In the church, the law of Christ cancels the cancel culture. It's supposed to be different in here. Isn't the cancel culture crazy? Like, you see it going on in our world all around us. But I'm going to be honest with you. I've been doing this a long time. I've met a lot of people over the years. I hear people's stories. I hear their background. And I hear their church background. And there's no way that I can even calculate the number of stories where I have been told people's experience with church in their past, that I'm convinced before we even knew the term cancel culture in terms of our world, I'm not so sure that the church wasn't already practicing it. Because there's too many stories that I've heard where people were in church, but yeah, they sinned. Their family did something that, and the next thing you know, they're gone. They're gone. The question is, did anybody stop long enough to go, wait a minute? Yeah. Where did they think that was going to go? Okay. But you know what? I've had to say the same thing to myself at the end of some days. I know what it's like to be in the ditch. Did anybody stop long enough to go, wait? We're called to love here just like we have been loved. It's time to step into the ditch and say, let's get out of here. Did anybody say it? Did anybody reach? The reason I think sometimes that doesn't happen is just a simple word called pride. And I think that's why verse 3 ends this way. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. If I said today, hey, there's a burden, we got a need, there's not a doubt in my mind that pretty much every piece of that need could be solved before we left this room today. Like, I believe that about us. If I go, hey, we need this, we could probably come up with it no matter what it is by the time we're finished today. But what I'm wrestling with is on a day-to-day basis, the reason many of us don't see the burdens of others is because there is this subtle form of pride in us. It's sort of like a default setting that for many of us, we can't see other struggles because deep down, we believe they should be seeing ours. It's a sign, usually, that my identity may be in something other than Jesus. Because those whose identity is in Jesus, they see others. They see others. Well, there is one more crucial piece to this beautiful picture, and I'll give it to you next week, all right? Because that's enough for today. Whew. That's enough for today. So I'll leave you with a few questions. Here's the first question. Am I set free enough from me to see the burdens of others? Come on, be honest with the question. Because the more the world is about you, then the angrier and more frustrated you are. But if the world is not about you and instead about Jesus, the happier and the freer you will be. It's an identity issue. And the good news of Jesus makes this identity possible. Some of us really may need to start today by just going, why is this struggle continuing in me? Why is this emptiness still in me? And it may be because we have tried to attach our identity to some other little g gods who are not made to fill the emptiness in our soul. And today it may be that your first step is to turn toward Jesus and to experience what it is to be fully loved and fully forgiven and adopted as a child of God. Second question, who am I failing to help? So maybe you're a child of God, and the reason I'm saying this is because maybe even as we're talking today, there's just an obvious, like there's somebody that comes to your mind that up until now you thought it was none of your business. You actually thought that being a Christian meant that is none of your business, and after today you know differently. It is your business. And it's time to climb into your heart and say, God, I want to check my motive, check my heart. I want this to be genuine. And then it's time to climb into the ditch and say, let's get out of here. And then one more I want to ask you. Who is my team of strong and safe? And here's what I mean by that. You know how to connect to get what you want. All right? In other words, in business, if there's a certain thing you need in your business, you know how to go after connecting to the right people to get what you want. You do. School, you know how to do that. Well, how about we do that with what I'm going to say matters more than any of that? How about the people that you know are strong enough to not just tell you what you want to hear, but they will actually tell you because they love you and in a gentle way, like, here's what you need to hear. That you can ask them when the accusations come, hey, do you see this? And they don't just agree, but they will climb into their own heart, and out of love and gentleness, they will climb into your ditch and say, let's get out of here. Let's get out of here. If you already have those people in your life, I would encourage you today to maybe send them a thanks. Send them a thanks. And be appreciative of the blessing of family of God that's this beautiful. I'll pray. I'll pray. Lord, I'm asking you to continue to make this family beautiful. As you grow us in courage to love one another. God, I'm asking you to make us a family that is not running from the truth, but in gentleness will speak in love, a motive of love and a spirit of humility that we know that we are not superior. We are who we are by your grace. God, would you set this body? God, set our hearts on restoring gently. Something so different than the cancel culture around us. That your people, in the way they love, will shine. They will shine as they reflect the greatness of who you are. This is our prayer. This is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.